Hi, I'm Jeff Abramson, a senior non-resident fellow at the Center for International Policy, talking here for a bit about the United States arms trade and weapons use policies and approach to the world, as well as what I think might happen globally in terms of pushing back against that policy and approach. So let me start first domestically. I think the Trump administration is on a very dangerous approach and a very extractive one in thinking about weapons trade and arms use issues. At the start of his administration, he undid the Biden administration's convention on transfer policy, which included a decent amount of respect for human rights and concern to that in the arms trade, and reverted to the policy the Trump administration had previously. I expect possibly in 2026 he will issue a new CAT policy, a new convention on arms transfer policy that follows an approach that is very extractive. We will sell weapons when it's in our interests and when we get something out of it. No real mention of human rights and no real concern about authoritarians. Well, to be seen, but that's been, I'd say, how he's approaching the arms trade. I could also see a lesser transparency in the arms trade. We've already seen his allies in Congress calling for changes in the notification threshold to make it more difficult for us to know what is going on. And we also have seen, as was in his first term, support to oppressive regimes. The Trump administration and this administration met with Saudi Arabia as it had met with Saudi Arabia in the first year of its the first administration. This year, promising $142 billion in arms sales. What those will be exactly is unclear, but clearly the repression that Saudi Arabia is committing is not of concern to the Trump administration. Similarly, the United States under the Trump administration is lending support in arms to Israel without any terms. This is problematic. Again, another sign that we could potentially see more support for autocratic regimes. Trump administration seems to be friendly with many of those around the world, and concerns are not around the human rights sides. The Trump administration is also relatively unbound by Congress in this administration. I will say, however, that we are seeing some pushback. For the first time, a majority of the Democratic Party voted in the Senate on a resolution to block some arms sales to Israel, showing some restraint and some understanding of the concerns around this. But the Trump administration has, in this calendar year, a tiny bit with it was predating them, but in this calendar year, there's been $100 billion in foreign military sales notifications. Again, a staggering number, and I think a sign that this administration will be seeking to sell as many weapons as it can without a lot of concern. But I also think the way the Trump administration is approaching the weapons use issues is alarming. I would say that my country is committing murder in the Caribbean and the Pacific. At this point, it's unclear if we're about to head to war with Venezuela. I think the majority of Americans do not want an endless war. And the Trump administration and Trump himself, who talks about seeking a Nobel Peace Prize for all the conflicts he ended, really much takes a militarized approach to the world, which I think is not a positive one. And if other countries pick up on that, which some will, is also not conducive to a more restrained approach and a more productive, collaborative one. Now, thinking internationally now, obviously, this administration is not a fan of the Arms Trade Treaty. The first Trump administration tried to withdraw from the Arms Trade Treaty, but Trump is also very strongly rejecting parts of the United Nations, the ICC. You saw him withdraw USAID from the world. I think the global community knows that the America First approach by the Trump administration is extractive. It's not about building international approaches that are shared. It's really about what the United States can get out of it. I hope that they will also reject this idea of natural rights. The Trump administration is trying to push away from human rights with some hard to understand natural rights approach, which really would be a backward step, undermining a lot of international law. Now, obviously, the United States could play a positive role. I would say in the Arms Trade Treaty and the Political Declaration on Explosive Weapons in Populated Areas, the United States, while not perfect, was supportive under other administrations of those. But clearly, things such as the Mine Ban Treaty, the Convention on Cluster Munitions, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, key and successful humanitarian disarmament treaties, the United States, if not agnostic, was working against many of those treaties, and they've been successful. So I would say that we will see some trends that we saw started before the Trump administration. We have to remember that during the Biden administration, there was nearly unfettered support for Israel. There was also the transfer of cluster munitions and landmines to Ukraine, which undermined those treaties. And countries stood up then. So South Africa, for example, was a country that looked to other mechanisms to try and create some restraint in the arms trade. And I'm encouraged by some things I am seeing internationally. It is not easy, but growing number of countries are pushing for a legally binding instrument on lethal autonomous weapon systems. I think we'll see some progress, hopefully, on that in 2026. I think you're also seeing countries pushing back on the Trump administration strikes in the Caribbean and the Pacific, either not sharing intelligence or simply calling those illegal, which I believe they are. I'm hoping more countries will do so. Europe, which is now committed to investing 5% of its GDP towards defense, is a challenging step in terms of that will lead to more production, potentially more trade in the arms trade space. But I think Europe might be splitting right now a bit on how it's approaching Ukraine. Some of those splits may lead to some possibilities for others taking a lead or coalitions in ways that do advance more thoughtful approaches to the arms trade and international law. I am encouraged by the global initiative on the international humanitarian law, which is got about 100 countries plus the ICRC involved in trying to really show that we should respect IHL now. These are unlikely character countries working together, so it's unclear where they'll go. But I think those processes that continue to push for a greater understanding and a value of some international law will be good, and hopefully good for arms trade restraint and better approaches to it. And then, of course, there are the actors that we always need to be important that we've seen be involved in different ways in the last little while that I think can be important, whether that's financiers, corporations who actually do take up human rights due diligences. I would say citizens who are pushing for those things, as well as legal cases that shine a light and draw attention. I'd say in the United States, people here are not looking for endless wars. There will be an election in 2026. The possibilities there could lead to some change, some restraint. So 2026 can be a difficult year, but I think there are possibilities both domestically and internationally for some pushback against what I see right now from this presidential administration in the United States, which is a dangerous and extractive approach to the arms trade and weapons use. Thanks.